Hey YouTube, Joyboy here. So, today I want to talk about the Underworld Emperors. But before we get into the topic of the video today, I want to let you guys know again about my Discord. If you don't know what it is, if you want to check it out, link for that will be in the description. Alright guys, I want you to figuratively, not literally, figuratively raise your hands if you completely forgot that the Underworld Emperors are present in the Whole Cake Island arc. If you again figuratively raise your hand, I would assume that you're not alone. Because they were there and then they're just, they're gone. Where'd they go? No one knows. But we cannot forget that Eiichiro Oda is a schemer. He has plans, he has plots, he introduces characters that may not be relevant for some time in the story. It's part of the reason why we love him so much. And so when we're talking about the Underworld Emperors, there's really only 3 characters which have gotten any amount of discussion whatsoever, and that would be Stussy, Dufeld, and Morgans, mainly because they're the only ones who played any active role in the story so far. And of these characters, Dufeld seems to be dead, so he's not important. It doesn't appear as though, although granted he could reappear and do something important, but more so Morgans and Stussy. Stussy because she is also a member of CP Cypherpole 0, and Morgans because he's head of the news. And so we expect that there's some possibility, at least, that Stussy and Morgans could be crucial to Whole Cake Island, or maybe crucial afterwards. But when it comes to the other members of the Underworld Emperors, there's just silence and crickets. And so one of the main points of discussion surrounding Whole Cake Island for seemingly the last several months is, sure, you can speculate all day about things that might occur in this arc, but it's going to end soon, so whatever you're going to speculate, it's probably not the case. A good portion of the fandom seems pretty ready for Wano and the Reverie. But Oda doesn't care what you think, and Whole Cake Island keeps getting longer and longer, and our impression of its future length also elongates. Sounds really weird when you say that. Now, while I understand that many people agree that they will eventually become important, I think a lot of people would assume that they would be important in arcs aside from Whole Cake Island, maybe in a Wano arc or another future arc. There's not enough time left to address any actions of the brokers in Whole Cake Island. But since people are finally coming around to the idea that Whole Cake Island might last a lot longer than they had initially intended, I think I can finally share my thoughts about what the brokers, or the Underworld Emperors I should say, might do in Whole Cake Island. But I want you guys to understand this, that regardless of what specific thing that you believe in, that for sure, knowing Oda, knowing his tendencies as a writer, that they will appear again sometime, most probably, whether it be here or later. I'm just going to speculate what they might do here because I actually have an argument for it. So let's start off with the most general question possible. If you are the Underworld Emperors in Whole Cake Island, what would your objective be? What is it that you would do given the circumstances that are occurring right now? And so firstly, you are a criminal. Your entire lives revolve around doing shady things in order to make yourself wealthy. It's pretty obvious that none of these people would have had an opportunity previously to make any sort of profit off of Whole Cake Island while Big Mom is there, her entire family is there and conscious. But with Big Mom roaming around, with the Big Mom pirates distracted and fighting against the Straw Hats, the Vinsmoke, as well as the Fire Tank pirates, this leaves you an opportunity to do something, to capitalize on the situation. Another point that I want to emphasize is that it seems incredibly likely to me that the Underworld Emperors are not friends with Big Mom, that they don't care what happens to her or her territory. We can kind of see this at the very beginning of the Tea Party where Katakuri shoots Jigra, the organ dealer. That the only reason that the Underworld Emperors are present is because they have to be, otherwise they will face consequences. Big Mom kills those who don't show up to the tea party when invited. And this kind of relates to another point, which is that they wouldn't help Big Mom fight any of these groups that oppose her. I just could not see them doing that. And I think that these Straw Hats have enough obstacles already. So I can really see the Underworld Emperors only having one of 3 motives. Firstly, revenge against Big Mom. Secondly, profiting from Big Mom's territory. Thirdly, getting the hell out of there as fast as humanly possible. And so in regards to the second point, we have already seen this occur. Now I think the counter argument to the Underworld Emperors attempting to profit off of Big Mom's whatever it is in Whole Cake Island right now is that what would happen if Big Mom found out. But it's very clear that Dufeld didn't care and was willing to risk it in order to obtain the Tamate Bako box. So I think at the very least what this justifies is that the Underworld brokers would be willing to do things that might be potentially risky. And I think just in general, being an Underworld Emperor, you live a very risky life. So aside from the Tsamate Bako box, which has now exploded and has completely vanished from existence, what other things potentially in Whole Cake Island would be worthy of taking? Or could the Emperors in some way profit from? And so firstly, Big Mom has poneglyphs, and she has a road poneglyph. Nekomamushi and Inuyarashi, as well as the rest of the minks, or some of the minks at the very least, seem to know that Big Mom possesses this poneglyph. I don't think it's out of the question for this to be common knowledge among the Underworld. So knowing that these things potentially exist in Whole Cake Island could give the Underworld Emperors something to aim for, something to nab. Next we have the actual residents of Whole Cake Island, and maybe if you were to look at someone specifically, you could look at someone like Pudding. Pudding from the rare three-eyed tribe. Now, I would imagine that in the black market, someone like Pudding would be worth a ton of money. But we also know that members of various races in general can fetch a hefty price tag, specifically from people like nobles and the celestial dragons in the human auction house. Whether Big Mom realizes this or not, she is sitting on a veritable gold mine. If you're thinking about each of these various races being worth over 500,000 berries per individual. What's even more interesting about this is that it's kind of hinted at that the Big Mom pirates spend all of their money. Tamago tries to persuade Big Mom to take the Straw Hat's gold, or Luffy's gold that he was offering her, because they were in need of the money. So from an outsider looking in, Big Mom might be wasting what could be a huge fortune just from the residents that she's protecting in Whole Cake Island. Again, while Big Mom might be considered to be evil by many of the community, she's evil in a different way than the Underworld Emperors. They're all about those stacks, but Big Mom's all about those sweets. Sweets to her is money, but to the Underworld Emperors, her residents are sweet. And lastly, I suppose you would have the individual bounties of the members of the Big Mom Pirates, as well as anyone else who might contain a large bounty on Totland, dead or alive. And so straight up guys, I think it's fair to assume that regardless of whatever revenge the Underworld Emperors want to enact on Big Mom, the Big Mom herself is probably off limits. The woman can't take any damage. There's very little hope for them to succeed in actually doing anything to her, capturing her, or killing her. So I'm kind of removing that off of the options. But I think as long as they maintain secrecy in what it is that they're doing, everything else is possible. And as stated earlier, we're going to ignore the option that they're just going to run away and reappear in another arc as important characters are having some sort of important role in the story. And the last thing that I want to bring up is that it does not seem as though the Underworld Emperors are on the greatest of terms. They may each work in the Underworld in some facet, but they only work together when it is necessary. They are not friends. So I'm very doubtful that they would be willing to team up because that would force them to split the profit when they could possibly succeed individually. So now let's speculate specifically what each of the Underworld Emperors, all of them, might end up doing in Whole Cake Island. And so if there is any clues whatsoever, I think that we should first look at what it is that they do in the Underworld and their epithets. So as talked about on multiple occasions previously, Big News Morgan's is all about that scoop. I think that Big News Morgan's goal for leaving Whole Cake Island is to leave with information. And Oda has essentially already allowed him to do so because Big News Morgan's was present for everything that occurred. And so when it comes to Stussy, she is known as the Queen of the Pleasure Quarter. But I don't think that this is important. I think what was more important is the reveal that she's part of Cypher Pole Zero, which has specifically a goal of taking down Big Mom. While this is debatable as for now, in the past we got specific evidence that they attempted to capture her, were just unable. And even ties back to Big Mom's flashback with Mother Carmel, who attempted to sell her off to the world government. So as we have talked about in a theory previously, I'll include it as a link in the description, there's some possibility that Stussy contacts members of the government, maybe other members of Cypher Pole Zero and the Celestial Dragons, possibly in order to enact a Bustercall on Whole Cake Island. But regardless of what specifically she does, I can see her goal, her aim being to take down Big Mom when she is as vulnerable as she is now. As for Dewfeld, he was shot and we presume dead, so we will ignore him. And so this is where things might get interesting. Let's first talk about Drug Peklo. And so the first bit of information that I just want to share with you guys that maybe not everyone knows is that of the remaining Underworld Emperors, Drug Peklo was shown the most. So I presume that Drug Peklo is the most important. And so Drug Peklo is known as the Undertaker or the Mortician. And if you don't know what that is, that's essentially somebody who is in charge of funeral rites. When someone dies, they go to the Mortician or Undertaker. And so there's people like Jigra, the organ dealer who deals in dead people's organs, but I don't really see Drug Peklo dealing in dead bodies. And hosting funerals, there doesn't seem to be a lot of profit in that, at least per se. If I were to rationalize this epithet, it kind of gives me the impression that Drug Peklo might actually be an assassin. In the actual real-life underworld, assassination is a huge component. And we do see Drug Peklo walking around with a scythe, which looks pretty intimidating. He also has the kanji for death on his shoulder, the scythe also being a common symbol of death and the god of death. So I'm thinking that Drug Peklo kills people for profit. So he'd be an assassin. And so when it comes to assassinations, the only way that you're going to make money off of your kills is if someone pays you. And so unless Drug Peklo was specifically contracted to kill someone specifically, then the most likely recourse in order to make money off of this situation, given Drug Peklo's presumed profession, would be to profit off of the various bounties of the people that are on Whole Cake Island. And so while he may be capable of taking out someone who is still alive, fighting someone like Luffy, for instance, if he wanted Luffy's bounty, I think that the smartest course of action for him is to just pick up the dead bodies that Big Mom herself has strewn about. Bodies of characters such as Charlotte Opera. This is my best guess for what Drug Peklo is doing now, following the carnage and collecting the rewards. And so this will lead us next into Giberson. And so Giberson is known as the Concealer, and it also states that he is a storage industry titan, or as it says on the Wikipedia, a veteran warehouseman. So the idea here is that he hides things. Most probably these would be some sort of illicit or illegal substances. So an example for something like this would be like in the Alabasta arc where Crocodile was able to obtain dance powder. It seems likely to me that Giberson, as an Underworld Emperor, probably keeps dance powder in some sort of facility somewhere and hides it. So Giberson is always shown drunk and with some kind of alcohol, and this could be a callback to Prohibition in the United States where alcohol was made illegal. But Giberson, of course, has this because he is the Concealer. And so in order to go into the storage business, I would think that you would have to first start off as some kind of thief. This may be a bit of a reach, but to have substances that are illegal, you have to obtain them in some way. We'll get into this in a little bit, but Umit, the last guy that we have to talk about, is actually the shipping magnate. So basically, how I see it is that there are people from across the world who may be stealing things, who may be producing things, send them to Giberson, and Giberson pays them. Actually, as a fun fact, Frankie and the Frankie family actually supplied goods to the black market from these ships that they dismantled. So it's possible that they had at least some relation to Giberson. From Giberson, many of the black markets from across the world buy his goods, or maybe even some people buy directly from him. And so in order to ensure that these goods arrive at their destinations, if not bought straight from the source, Giberson contracts Umit, who is the shipping magnate, to safely get the goods where they need to go. So anyway, to get to the point here, if Giberson deals in a lot of stolen goods, then Giberson himself might be considered some kind of thief. I think this goes along well with his epithet of being the Concealer. So if you are looking for anything that can possibly be worth being stolen in Whole Cake Island, I think that you are kind of left with, now that the Tamate Baku box has exploded, the poneglyphs. My best guess for what Giberson might be doing during this whole fiasco is trying to steal Big Mom's poneglyphs. And so lastly, we have the shipping magnate, Umit. And so basically what he would specialize in is shipping illicit or illegal goods. Honestly speaking, this probably involves everything. But I think that a fair assumption that can be made is that Umit probably travels around with a very large fleet. He has a lot of ships at his disposal. That's what he would have to be as a shipping magnate, so that he can carry a lot of cargo. And so if you're familiar with history, then you know that during the era or the age of slavery, that slaves were transported from various countries using ships. We also know that in the world of One Piece, slavery is technically illegal. So if you were to perhaps capture some slaves in some part of the One Piece world and you wanted to transport them to another place, it seems to me that you would be pretty likely to contact the Underworld Emperor in charge of shipping, Umit. As I talked about previously, Big Mom is essentially sitting on a veritable gold mine of human bodies. We know that human trafficking exists in this world illegally, and Umit has rose to power and gained a fortune by doing this very same thing. So if Umit is looking to profit off of what's taking place in Whole Cake Island right now, he might be attempting to capture various residents of Totland and Whole Cake Island, the rarest races of the world. And so again, if we're assuming that this might be what goes down in Whole Cake Island, I think from the last example at the very least, you should suspect that Umit will not be successful because the Straws have never allowed something as heinous like this to go down right underneath their nose. They are not going to let these innocent civilians become slaves. I am also extremely skeptical that Drug Piccolo would be successful in obtaining the various Big Mom pirates who have high bounties. And I am also skeptical that any CP0 or government or marine intervention will be successful. So if you assume the first to be true, and you assume what I just said to be true, then what I'm trying to convey to you is the impression that the Underworld Emperors attempt to act against Big Mom, but ultimately fail. And the other aspect of this, which I have not yet addressed, is why Oda would even introduce this into the story in the first place. What purpose does it serve? And so the way that I see it, what Oda could potentially be setting up is Big Mom essentially destroying the Underworld. And I think that Oda may have also foreshadowed this. If we go back to Big Mom's flashback, something a lot of people noticed, and I think people took this wrong in many respects, but back in Big Mom's flashback, we got to meet the other children from her orphanage. And we are not going into detail about this right now, but it is very clear to me that the children from Big Mom's orphanage bear strong resemblance to the Underworld Emperors. You can just look at them, you can compare and contrast them. I'm sure that there's other theories on the internet which you can find. Now, a lot of people previously claimed them to be the very same people, and that is clearly not the case. The orphans are not the Underworld Emperors of today. There's just many similarities. They look similar. And so I think partly Oda was trying to parallel Big Mom's first tea party with the current tea party. That the original guests of her tea party back when she was just 6 years old were these orphans, and then today she invites people who happen to look very similar. These were Big Mom's friends, quote unquote. I think this emphasizes another idea which Oda has tried to push, which is that Big Mom is reliving her past, or attempting to relive her past. The greatest day she ever had, which was also simultaneously the worst day of her life. And so everyone was at this tea party, her family, her friends, otherwise resembling the orphans from her childhood, and Carmel as a portrait. And there's actually some other interesting possible parallels, which is that Mother Carmel died in the tea party when Big Mom was 6, and her portrait was destroyed here. Mother Carmel also worked with Cypherpole, and we can see that Stussy also works with Cypherpole. So I do think that it may be possible that the idea that Oda may be attempting to foreshadow is that just as Big Mom killed the orphans back during her first tea party, perhaps she kills the paralleled orphans or the Underworld Emperors here today. And maybe not necessarily kill them, but defeat them. And by defeating them, essentially unravel the entire Underworld. And so lastly guys, the last thing that I think that Oda might be potentially using this as a plot point for is potentially helping Big Mom be redeemed. Again here, I expect a ton of dislikes from even mentioning this, but if you really sit there and think about it, what would your reaction be towards the realization that Big Mom is in fact protecting people on her islands? No matter how Oda decides to spin it, if he uses this as a plot point, it makes Big Mom look better. Which is really unprecedented for an undefeated major antagonist, major villain. The order of events goes as follows. The Straw Hats defeat the major antagonist, then afterwards Oda can spend some time redeeming their characters. When it comes to the characters that he redeems before the Straw Hats have defeated them, they do not end up as major antagonists. I'm talking about like Boa Hancock and Aokiji. It creates conflicting emotions when your readership starts sympathizing with the villains. And while some stories explore this relationship, One Piece typically does not. The same applies if Big Mom ends up saving her family members that she has already essentially killed while not being aware of it. This lines in with the general speculations that those who've died, such as Opera, will get their lifespan back in some way or another. And as I've been pushing for a very long time, I do think that Big Mom does care about her family, even if she shows it in very weird ways. And even more arguable than this is that the Big Mom pirates in general care about their siblings and about their residents. So I do believe that it could create a very interesting moment at the end of this arc if all of their family members who had died came back to life and that they were saved after attempting to be captured by a member of the Underworld's Emperors. And a moment such as this can completely change your opinion about the Big Mom pirates, which is something that Oda could be setting up. But anyway guys, just wanted to share my thoughts about the Underworld Emperors and the role that they could possibly have still in Whole Cake Island. So let me know what you think, let me know if you agree or disagree, and why. Just share your thoughts. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video. Make sure to check out links for Patreon as well as Discord in the description. Huge thanks to all of my Patreons. Subscribe if you haven't, and as always guys, have a wonderful day.